Hello gardeners, welcome to my February garden guide where I share over 70 vegetable, flower, and herb ideas to give you all inspiration on what to plant this month and encourage you to try growing something new. Actually, this is the biggest garden guide I have ever done so far, so I'm super excited to share all of these planting ideas with you, including some unique or lesser known crops that you probably have never heard of before. I have ideas for everyone no matter where you're located. If you're new here, hello and welcome. My name is Jara. I've been gardening all of my life and I'm a professional seed and plant nursery. I love to share my knowledge and teach others how to garden and grow food, so you've come to the right place if you want to improve your gardening skills. And guys, this is Teddy. He's my garden companion. He can be in the videos as long as he sits still, so we'll see what happens. There's a lot going on in February, from direct sowing seeds to starting transplants in time for spring planting. I'm going to go through each crop category in terms of when to plant according to your last spring frost date, since frost dates determine when you should be starting seeds and planting your garden, not the garden zones. As I go through each crop category, I explain what hot climate gardeners like me, those of us that have passed or will be passing our last spring frost dates in February, should do, and I also explain what my cold climate gardener friends should also do. In the description of this video, you will find links to a copy of this list on my website so you can reference it and not have to take notes. There is a free printable PDF checklist of what you can plant right now. I also have seeds or plants on my website for just about everything I'm going to mention, so check out the links in the description. I have a lot to cover, so let's get started with greens, all sorts of leafy, lush greens. If you're past your spring frost date, or you will be passing it right now in February, go ahead and direct sow seeds for all the greens I'm about to mention. If you're more up north, sow seeds indoors 4 to 6 weeks before your last spring frost date to grow your own transplants. Lettuce is an easy choice for everyone. I really like colorful lettuce like super red romaine, bronze mignonette, and freckles. If you are 6 weeks away from your last spring frost date, you can sow spinach seeds indoors to grow transplants. I don't recommend hot climate gardeners try and grow spinach right now. It hates the heat. I direct sowed these seeds in November and it's grown into a lush patch of spinach, but this will all be dying out once the heat returns in about March. Spinach doesn't like temperatures above 80 degrees Fahrenheit, so if you're expecting that within the next 3 months, it's not worth growing right now. But you can grow Swiss chard because it is more heat tolerant than spinach, which I have growing right here. If you're past your last spring frost date, just direct sow the seeds. Swiss chard is a long-lived annual and will produce lots of leafy greens over the course of several weeks. My cold climate friends can sow Swiss chard seeds indoors 6 weeks before your last spring frost date. My hot climate friends who passed or will be passing their last spring frost dates can start investing into heat tolerant greens, so they are established and producing in your garden by the time the heat returns. Some options include New Zealand spinach, which is a pretty good substitute for lettuce, and tatsoi, which is actually an Asian mustard green, but it's a very good substitute for spinach. Other heat tolerant greens include Molokhia and Malabar spinach, which can be direct sown from seed. You can also start planting South Sea salad tree, longevity spinach, Okinawan spinach, which was the green featured in the Blue Zone Diet documentary on Netflix, and chaya. These are not grown from seed, instead you would grow from a plant. All of them are huge perennial plants that produce loads of leafy greens. They have an ornamental look, so you can include them in your front yard landscaping, and the HOAs won't even know you're growing vegetables out there. Some other unique and lesser known greens that can be direct sown if you're past your last spring frost date or sowed indoors about 6 weeks before your last spring frost date to grow transplants includes huntasai, if I'm saying that correctly, which is a flowering cabbage grown to eat its leafy stems, and Yucchina Savoy, which is a gorgeous crinkled leaf version of tatsoi. Okay, that wraps up the leafy green category. Let's talk about beans. If you're past your last spring frost date, go ahead and start direct sowing seeds for bush beans, which are short, compact plants that are best for smaller growing spaces or containers. A good standard green bean variety is Blue Lake. However, if you have more space and a trellis, I recommend pole or vining beans because they produce more than bush beans. I personally love rattlesnake, Roma, and purple potted vining beans. Those of you that live in colder climates should hold off on bush or pole beans for now because they like warmer temperatures, but you can grow fava beans because they are super cold hardy, down to around 10 degrees Fahrenheit, which is pretty much down to garden zones 5. Ideally though, they need soil temperatures to be in the 40s to 60s range in order to germinate. You could sow 1 seed per cell of a larger sized seed tray. This is a 10 by 20 size tray with 50 cells for reference, and keep it indoors so the soil temperature is warmer to induce germination. In about 3 weeks, they're ready to be popped out and transplanted into the garden. My hot climate friends should have planted fava beans in November through January. It's going to get way too hot too soon to plant them now. If you're past your last spring frost date, you can also direct sow seeds for lima beans, like these beautiful Christmas lima beans. You can also plant soybeans and azuki beans. These crops grow best in consistently warm temperatures, not extreme heat like over 85 degrees Fahrenheit. So if you're a hot climate gardener, now is the time to grow them or wait to grow a crop in fall. Someone asked me what is the difference between runner beans like scarlet runner beans and regular green beans. They are both part of the legume family but are different species. Green beans are quick, short-lived annual plants. They produce about 2 flushes or so of bean pods and then they're done. Runner beans are much more vigorous and tough plants. They are short-lived perennials in warmer climates, so you will get more production out of them long term. You can harvest runner beans before the beans inside swell up and use it just like you would green beans to eat the entire pod. Once the beans fill out, it's best used as a shelling bean where you store away and use like any other kind of dried bean. Runner beans can be direct sown after you're past your last spring frost date. Next, we have tomatoes. I'm getting a lot of questions asking for tomato variety recommendations, so here's a list of a few of my favorites. I also have seeds for them on my website if you want to grow the same tomatoes from my garden to yours. If you're past your last spring frost date, you should be transplanting tomatoes right now. If you have not started them from seed yet, then you're kind of too late to grow indeterminate beefsteaks from seed. So instead, hurry up and sow seeds for microdwarfs, cherries, determinates, or dwarf varieties because they will produce sooner than a beefsteak. The goal for hot climate gardeners is to hurry up and harvest all of your tomatoes before around June when it just gets way too hot for them to produce and the disease and pest pressure is insane anyways. Use grow lights like my favorite Mars Hydro grow lights to really cut down on the time it takes to grow them from seed. With grow lights, it takes me 6 to 8 weeks to grow my tomatoes from seed. Without grow lights, it takes 10 to 12 weeks. If you're 8 weeks away from your last spring frost date, then now is the time to start sowing tomatoes indoors. If you don't have space in your house, you can get a mini greenhouse and set it up outside or in your garage with a few heat mats at the bottom. Then zip it shut with some grow lights zip tied to the shelves. I'll link in the description to all the supplies I use when growing my tomatoes and my tutorial that shows every step of how I sow tomato seeds. Peppers take a very long time to grow from seed. I give them 3 months of growing time before they're ready for transplanting. So if you're 3 months away from your last spring frost date, start sowing whatever variety of pepper you would like indoors only. I have a tutorial all about how to grow peppers from seed, which I will link below. I really like any of the Marconi peppers, banana peppers, and yellow monster sweet bell peppers because they produce a lot. If you're a hot climate gardener like me and have not got around to sowing peppers from seed yet, I would focus on tropical pepper varieties. These grow in tropical regions of the world like South America and the Caribbean. They produce even in high heat conditions straight through the summer when traditional peppers just kind of shut down. Some of my favorites are ají cachuca, piqueño, also called sweetie drops, cap 455, Trinidad pimento, and criolla de cucina. Also, pretty much any hot pepper variety will grow great in extreme conditions, so go ahead and sow seeds for jalapenos, serranos, habaneros, etc. Hot peppers are just more vigorous compared to other types of peppers. Now let's talk about some brassicas. If you're past your last spring frost date, go ahead and direct sow seeds for bok choy. I like to sow them pretty densely and then harvest out the bigger ones to leave room for the rest to continue growing. This is a patch of purple bok choy. The rest of you can sow seeds indoors to grow out bok choy transplants about 6 weeks before your last spring frost date. Honestly though, it's so much easier to direct sow the seeds, so my preference is to just wait until I can do that over babying little transplants. Some varieties like extra dwarf bok choy can be ready for harvest in as little as 30 days. So yeah, it's a good crop to just direct sow the seeds. If you're past your last spring frost date, you can direct sow seeds for NAPA cabbage, which grows so much faster than regular heading types of cabbage and tolerates warmer temperatures as well. I would not plant any more heading types of brassicas like cabbage and broccoli going forward if you're a hot climate gardener. Wait until fall. The most similar thing to broccoli my hot climate gardener friends can grow right now in February is Chinese broccoli. It is grown for its thick stems that are very similar in taste and texture to broccoli stems. It grows fast, so you will get a harvest in before it just gets way too hot. Just direct sow seeds in soil that has blood meal added into it to promote rapid growth. My cold climate friends can start growing heading brassicas indoors 10 to 12 weeks before your last spring frost date. This is things like broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage, and Brussels sprouts. They take forever to size up and be ready to transplant, so start now. I recommend D. Checo for a standard green broccoli because it is a reliable heirloom variety, purple sprouting broccoli because it's just so pretty, plus I never see purple broccoli at the grocery store. For a large heading type of cabbage, I really like Savoy because it has a more mild asparagus-like flavor. Brussels sprouts take forever, probably the longest brassica to get from seed to harvest, so focus on varieties that produce in less than 90 days. Those of you that are about 8 weeks away from your last spring frost date can sow kale indoors to grow your own transplants. Pick any kale variety you would like. My personal favorite is any of the lacinato types like Black Tuscan, Dazzling Blue, or Black Magic. magic. They just live a long time. I've had plants live over 2 years. Or choose Siberian or Russian kale if you're in a cold climate, because those survive even when covered in snow. Gardeners who are past their last spring frost date can transplant kale instead. Don't be just starting them from seed. Some other members of the Brassicas family include leafy greens like mustards and collard greens. Mustard leaves are thinner and softer, more like lettuce, but have a peppery flavor. At least most of them do. There is a wide variety of mustard greens. Some have very large and broad leaves like the Florida broadleaf mustard. Others have very frilly serrated leaves like Mizuna. Some have a classic peppery flavor, while others are more mild like Tatsoi and Komatsuma. Those are more mild. Mustard greens are harvested as baby greens to be eaten raw before they develop a peppery flavor, or if harvesting mature leaves, they're usually cooked down. Collard greens don't have such a peppery kick when compared to mustard greens. The leaves are thicker, even more thick than kale leaves, and usually are cooked down. Both mustards and collards produce a lot of leafy greens per plant, and you can harvest over the course of several weeks. Plus, not too many pests like bothering them, at least not on the level of how they will infest broccoli or kale, for example. Okay, so we talked all about green things. Let's get into some other crops. Right off the bat, I want to talk about corn. If you're past your last spring frost date, you can direct sow seeds for corn. There are so many different varieties of corn, so I wanted to explain each one so you pick the best one for your garden. First off is sweet corn. There are some heirloom varieties like golden bantam, but the majority of sweet corn are hybrids like Silver King sweet corn. These hybrids have been bred to have certain characteristics like be extra sweet or stay fresh for a longer period of time. Hybrid is not the same as GMO, just saying. Growing hybrids is okay. That's a discussion for another day though. If you're looking to make your own corn for grits or flour, it is best to grow either dent or flint corn. Dent corn, also called field corn, has more soft carbs than flint corn, thus why the kernels have a dent on top. Since dent corn is softer, it is the most common one used for animal feed too. Flint corn is super hard with no dent. A lot of decorated types of corn are flint corn varieties because of this, but you can also eat flint corn in the same ways that you would dent corn. It is used to make more coarse types of corn flour like semolina, for example. Lastly, we have popcorn, which is a variety of flint corn used for popping. These tend to have small kernel sizes, and a lot of the varieties are short plants, so they're easy to grow in small gardens or in grow bags. I encourage you to try growing other types of corn beyond just sweet corn because there is so much that you can do with them. Circling back to things in the nightshade family like tomatoes and peppers, my next idea is eggplant. If you're past your last spring frost date, it is time to transplant eggplant, not just be starting them from seed. If you're 3 months away from your last spring frost date, go ahead and sow seeds for eggplants indoors only to grow your own transplants. There are so many varieties of eggplant, well beyond the kind found at the standard American grocery store. If you would like to make Asian recipes like grilled or stir-fried eggplant, get some of the long Asian types like long ping tongue. If you would like to make Italian recipes, use an eggplant like Rosa Bianca. Next, we're going to talk about 3 huge categories of crops, and that's squash, cucumbers, and melons. These 3 crops have similar growing requirements, so that's why I just lump them all together. If you're past your last spring frost date, go ahead and direct sow seeds, or you can transplant. You want to grow them quickly in early spring before all the pests and diseases wake up from their winter dormancy. If you're not past your last spring frost date, sow the seeds indoors 6 to 8 weeks before your last spring frost date. Use a bigger size container because these crops grow really big, and use heat mats to keep the soil warm. Let's talk about squash first. If you're looking for a traditional zucchini, I recommend Black Beauty or gray zucchini. If you want something that will produce very early, I recommend any of the patty pan types of squash. If you struggle with lots of squash pests and diseases, then I recommend anything in the Cucurbita moscata family because they have extra tough woody stems, making it harder for the pests to bother. I'm not saying you won't get any pests, it's just harder for them to ruin squash that are in the C. moscata family, giving you a higher chance to harvest something. Examples of C. moscata squash include Seminole pumpkins, Musky de Provence, butternut squash, and Tromboncino rapicante. Tromboncino is my favorite actually because if harvested young while still green, you can use it just like zucchini. Or let it mature until it turns tan and you can use it like a butternut squash. I have a tendency to grow squash cultivars that originate from tropical regions of the world because they are pretty tough plants and tolerate the heat. For example, Sakil is a squash grown to harvest its very large seeds to be used as pepitas. The Mayans grind or mash the seeds to make a pumpkin seed dip called Sakil pak. I probably didn't pronounce that right, but this is a very typical Mayan dish. There is also a small zucchini-like squash that goes by the name Calabacita chica, grown all over Central America. It is harvested when still like small and green and usually just stuffed and baked. And lastly, a squash that is popular in the Dominican Republic where my family comes from, and that's calabaza. So if you're a hot climate gardener struggling to grow squash, explore these varieties and let me know how it goes. I still have more ideas for you all. I was not kidding when I said this was the the biggest garden planting guide I have ever done yet. I really try to rack my brain when I come up with these ideas every month. Sometimes I wonder if it's just too much. I don't know, because I could go on and on. But hey, if you guys have any ideas for me or unique crops that I missed or didn't mention, please comment so I can include it next time and make this list even bigger. Okay, moving along, the next crop is cucumbers. Just like with squash, cucumbers catch a ton of diseases and pests, so it really helps to grow it right after your last spring frost date while things are still cool, and hopefully you can harvest before all the pests start waking up and reproducing all over the garden after winter dormancy. Spring and fall is when I grow traditional cucumbers, like the kind that you would find at standard grocery stores. That would be market cucumbers like Beta Alpha, or pickling cucumbers like Boston pickling. Or try Calypso, which is a hybrid pickling cucumber bred to resist some of the common cucumber diseases. Or you can try Asian cucumbers. They tend to have higher disease and pest resistances and a more crunchy and sweet flavor. My personal favorite is China Jade. I also recommend some cucumber alternatives, meaning they are not actual cucumbers but can be used just like cucumbers. These varieties just grow much better in extreme conditions. Some examples include cucamelons, Indian snake cucumber, and Armenian cucumbers. The last two are botanically classified as melons but have flavor and texture very similar to cucumbers. And that brings me to the last crop out of the three, and that's melons. If you're past your last spring frost date, hurry up and direct sow seeds. I like to plant about 3 seeds in a little mound. If you're 6 weeks away from your last spring frost date, sow the seeds indoors to grow your transplants. When it comes to watermelons, I really like Crimson Sweet and Moon and Stars. For a good classic heirloom cantaloupe, I like Hale's Best, and a good classic honeydew melon is Green Flesh Honeydew. I also really like to grow tropical honeydew melons like Kajari melons, which originates from India. I highly recommend you grow personal sized melon varieties if you're struggling with the pests and diseases. They will be ready for harvest earlier than the bigger varieties. The longer that melon sits outside developing, the more chances some pest, critter, or disease will destroy it. And some final tips when it comes to growing squash, cucumbers, and melons. Spray with 1 cup of hydrogen peroxide per gallon of water to treat for the leaf diseases, and spray with BT or spinosad to treat for any kind of chewing insect like pickleworms that chew up all the leaves. Fertilize frequently to encourage lots of new healthy green growth to outpace all the diseased or pest infested growth. And hand pollinate to increase production. If you can keep up with these little tips I just gave you, you'll get ahead of the majority of the problems when growing these crops. Now is a good time to sow seeds for okra indoors if you want to get an early start on the season. Aim to transplant okra outdoors 2 months after your last spring frost date to give the soil time to warm up. Sow the seeds in deep containers, something like solo cups with drainage holes cut at the bottom, because okra has a long taproot that needs room to grow. Place a heat mat under the containers to keep the soil warm for faster germination and growth. Try growing red burgundy okra for its crimson pods, or the popular Clemson spineless variety for an easy harvest. February is a great time to sow seeds indoors for tomatillos. Tomatillos are the main ingredient in Mexican salsa verde and are related to tomatoes. Grow and plant them exactly the same way as tomatoes, except there is one very important fact you need to know when growing tomatillos, and that's that they require another plant to cross-pollinate with in order to produce. Unlike tomatoes, which are self-fertile and you only need one plant to get production, so make sure you start seeds for more than just one plant. The standard tomatillo is green in color, but there is also a purple variety. I grow both because I do like to can a lot of salsa verde. All right, let's move on. Pretty much everyone can start herbs from seeds in February. If you're past your last spring frost date, it's totally fine to direct sow the seeds. Take advantage of the last remaining cool months to grow herbs that like cooler temperatures like cilantro and chamomile. And then get started growing herbs that do a little better with some warmth like basil, parsley, ginger, and oregano. Everyone else, start sowing herb seeds indoors if you are still about 2 months away from your last spring frost date. Just keep them indoors, but pot them up as they get bigger so they don't run out of growing space, and then plant them outside once all danger of frost has passed. Keep in mind that a lot of herbs are butterfly host plants, so for example, the black swallowtail butterfly will lay eggs on fennel, parsley, and dill because it is a food source for their caterpillars. Please do not spray these plants to kill the caterpillars. Instead, just plant way more than what you think you'll need, knowing that some of it's going to get sacrificed to the butterfly caterpillars. A lot of you have been asking me to make recommendations about flowers, so here goes. It is early spring, and there are some types of flowers that grow better now before the summer heat sets in. Examples include pansies, poppies, bachelor's buttons, yarrow, and snapdragons. If you're past your last spring frost date by this point, I recommend that you transplant. Everyone else can sow seeds indoors about 6 weeks before your last spring frost date to grow your own transplants. There are some flower bulbs that I like to plant immediately after my last spring frost date, and that includes dahlias, gladiolus, liatris, Asiatic lilies, and hollyhocks. I have grown all of these successfully even in my very hot hot Florida garden, but the trick is to plant them in January or February so they bloom before summer arrives. Some flowers you can direct sow after your last spring frost date include sunflowers, zinnias, calendula, cosmos, and nasturtiums. Many grain crops such as sorghum, millet, amaranth, and quinoa can be direct sown outdoors once you're past your last spring frost date and the soil begins to warm up. For best results, choose a sunny spot with well-draining fertile soil. Keep the soil consistently moist but not waterlogged to speed up germination. Regular weeding is also essential as young grain plants can struggle to compete with aggressive weeds. With proper care, these warm weather grains will reward you with robust, nutritious harvests later on in the season. The next category of crops is alliums. If you're past your last spring frost date, you can direct sow seeds or transplant bunching onions and chives. And that's pretty much it for now because it's about to get way too hot to be planting other types of alliums. However, my cold climate gardeners have more options. If you're 3 months away from your last spring frost date, go ahead and sow seeds indoors to grow your own transplants for bunching onions, long day or intermediate day, large bulbing onions, and leeks. They should be ready to transplant outside once your last spring frost date arrives. Cold climate gardeners should also prepare to plant shallot sets or bulbs 4 to 6 weeks before your last spring frost date. Now let's talk about root crops. If you're past your last spring frost date, you can direct sow seeds for radish or daikon, beets, and turnips. I would say February is your last chance to hurry up and direct sow seeds for these because it's about to get way too hot for them. You should also start rooting sweet potato tubers to grow your own slips. This whole process takes 2 to 3 months. Then your slips are ready to transplant by the time the soil is nice and warm. If you prefer to purchase sweet potato slips, plan on planting them into the garden 1 to 2 months after your last spring frost date. My cold climate gardener friends can direct sow seeds for parsnips, carrots, celeriac, and rutabaga if you're not expecting any more freezes, as in 32 degrees Fahrenheit or below. A freeze is different than a frost. These particular root crops should be okay if exposed to frost, but you might want to protect newly germinated or tender seedlings until the plants mature just a little bit, then they're okay. Also, a heads up, spring-grown potatoes are planted 2 to 4 weeks before your last spring frost date. So all of you with last spring frost dates in March and beyond need to start placing orders for your seed potatoes so you have them in time for planting. A fruiting berry that is easy to direct sow from seed or transplant once you're past your last spring frost date is ground cherries. This fruit is related to tomatoes but has a sweet tangerine, strawberry, banana type of flavor. I find that it grows best in my spring and fall seasons because it doesn't do too well in extreme heat. Everyone else can sow seeds indoors in the same manner you would tomatoes about 8 weeks before your last spring frost date to grow your own transplants. Speaking of fruit, if you're past your last spring frost date, now is a great time to select new fruit trees and plant them into your gardens so they get a little established before summer arrives. The easiest fruiting trees or plants for beginners are mulberries, pineapples, peaches, muscadine grapes, figs, and blackberries. All of these produce a lot of fruit and don't have too many pest or disease issues. If you're in a subtropical or tropical climate where it doesn't snow and temperatures don't drop below 30 degrees Fahrenheit, you can experiment with growing citrus, bananas, passion fruit, Barbados cherry, papaya, avocados, mangoes, lychees, and guava as just some ideas, but there's a lot more. As a home backyard gardener, focus on self-fertile varieties that don't require another tree to cross-pollinate with, so that means you can just grow one tree. Also choose dwarf varieties that don't get too tall so you can plant each tree much closer together, like 6 to 8 feet apart. That is how I cram in over 15 different fruit trees in my very small backyard garden. I have about 1,300 to 2,000-ish square feet of growing space on my property. I live on a 1/4 acre lot, so very small, and I still manage to grow a lot of variety of things. I have a lot of fruit trees and plants available on my website if you need some. If you're past your last spring frost date, it's a great time to plant a new asparagus bed or add to an existing one. Use asparagus crowns. I really like the ones that are at least 2 years old, so you start harvesting sooner rather than later. If you're a hot climate gardener, focus on purple asparagus varieties or those bred to tolerate high heat like UC 157. I start harvesting when the spears are as thick as my finger, which has happened as soon as 1 year after planting. The next few crops are for my cold climate gardener friends only. Yes, I've been thinking about you guys all covered in the snow. If you're 8 to 12 weeks away from your last spring frost date, go ahead and sow seeds for celery indoors only so you can transplant them once you're past your last spring frost date. Celery takes forever to grow, so starting them early indoors is key. The seeds also need light to germinate, so make sure you put them under a light source like some grow lights. Have you ever tried CELTUCE? Often mistaken for a type of celery, it's actually more similar to lettuce. Imagine the crisp texture of a broccoli stem with a mild nutty flavor. Also known as Chinese lettuce or asparagus lettuce, CELTUCE is primarily grown for its thick, tender stem enjoyed in stir-fries, soups, or even raw in salads. Start CELTUCE from seed about 8 weeks before your last spring frost date. CELTUCE requires similar germination germination conditions to celery. Specifically, the seeds need light to sprout. For the best results, sow them in containers where you can add a strong light source. Transplant them outdoors after your last spring frost date. Another planting idea for the colder climates includes a leafy green called corn salad. Corn salad, also known as mâché or lamb's lettuce, is a cold, hardy leafy green that's perfect for direct sowing right now. This tender, nutty flavored green thrives in cool weather and can tolerate frost and even freezing temperatures, making it an ideal choice for winter planting. Sow the seeds directly into the soil and keep the soil consistently moist for the best germination. Another cold climate crop that maybe you have never heard of is parsley root. Parsley root, also known as Hamburg root. Parsley is a veggie grown for its elongated, cream-colored root that has a slightly sweet, earthy flavor, somewhere between carrot, celery, and parsley. The root is perfect for soups, stews, and roasts. To grow it, sow seeds in the garden in early spring as soon as the soil can be worked. It will germinate in soils that are between 10 to 20 degrees Fahrenheit, which is very cold tolerant for a vegetable crop. Make sure the soil is loose and well draining, just like when you grow carrots. Parsley root is slow to germinate and grow. It takes about 5 months of growing time before you get to harvest, but it's a really great option if you're a cold climate gardener. My last veggie crop for just cold climate gardeners is a bok choy variety called woo choy. It can survive down to -5 degrees Fahrenheit, so just about everyone can direct sow seeds right now if the ground is workable and you're not expecting hard freezes. Woo choy matures quickly, making it an excellent choice for gardeners looking for a fast harvest during the cooler months. Well, that wraps up my February garden guide with over 70 planting ideas or inspiration to get you growing food this month. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a big thumbs up. That helps out my channel more than you know. Share this guide with your garden friends, check out the description for the free resources I mentioned, and subscribe so you don't miss any of my gardening tutorials. Thanks for watching and happy gardening. And in case you guys are wondering, sometimes I have Teddy out here with me in my videos. If he can kind of sit still, he was doing pretty good today, except he started digging around here, and I'm afraid he may have damaged some of these snow peas that I'm growing, but he's been pretty good. My husband is a teacher. He teaches how to use like programs, and he does live classes in the house. So if I leave Teddy in the house, he'll start crying for me because he's super attached to me, and then all the students in my husband's class hears him crying. So I have to bring him outside with me sometimes when I film my videos, but for the most part, he's pretty good. He's actually probably the best dog I ever had, to be honest. He is a golden doodle. We got him because my husband has really bad allergies to just about everything, including cats, dogs, all kinds of animals, but he's not allergic to Teddy at all. So it's the first time my husband and myself have been able to get a dog that's kind of bigger in size instead of like a Yorkie or something. So if you guys are wondering why he sits here next to me in some of my videos, it's for that reason. But he's pretty good.